it's Jessie from Bear Flower Farm. We are finally headed into spring, and that means a lot of us are doing farmers markets. So there was a recent question in a flower farming group that I'm in, and someone basically asked the questions, what are some other ancillary products that you sell in addition to flowers at your farmers market? So I thought this would be a good time to do a video about this and talk about some out of the box thinking that you may not have considered. So this video is for you if one, you want to diversify selling some stuff outside of flowers at your farmers market, or two, you are someone like me last year who was in their first year of flower farming, didn't have enough flowers to sell, and therefore needed a second or third product to sell in order to make that market worth it. So in this video, we're going to go over a couple of things. We're going to talk about your options. So besides making your own products, what else can you do? I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that outsourcing looks like, in addition to pricing, of course. I'm also going to talk about this concept of selling private label versus branded products. And last but not least, we're going to talk about pros and cons. So let's get started. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I am entering my second year of cut flower farming. I am in Zone B in New Jersey. And last year, my primary sales outlet for my flowers was a local farmer's market. Now, one of the things to note is that I will not be selling at this farmer's market again this year, not for any reasons outside of just me not wanting to dedicate my Sundays to it. I'm actually going to be selling at another type of market for florists this year. But that being said, I actually have a history of selling at craft fairs and farmers markets because I ran a side hustle soap company for 9 years. And for the first 4 years or so, our primary sales outlet was also markets until we converted basically to a 100% e-commerce company until last year. So that being said, I feel I do have some stuff that I can offer in this video. And I wanted to talk a little bit just about how my soap sales performed at the market relative to my flowers. So I said before that I just didn't have enough flowers to grow or to sell, but I did buy flowers from a local grower and I supplemented those flowers. So that means that I did have a decent quantity of flowers to sell. But that being said, my soap and candle sales outsold my flowers by about a 3-to-1 ratio. So that is a pretty big ratio. And one of the other things that I really observed at that market selling two different types of products is that, yes, there are some people who are going to buy your soap as well as your flowers. But for the most part, if you think about a Venn diagram, the two different types of customers are very much separated from each other. So people who bought soap and candles just bought soap and candles, and people who just bought flowers just bought flowers. So what that really means is that you are increasing the chances of someone coming to your booth if you are diversifying your product. Now, one thing I do want to note is that every farmer's market is really, really different. So for example, our farmer's market basically stipulated that if you wanted to sell any product, it had to be made in the state of New Jersey. So for me, with my soap company, I had gotten to the point about, I would say 5-6 years ago, where I could no longer handle making the soap. So I had a local soap maker make that soap, and that local soap maker is in New Jersey. So I still stayed within those rules. But you want to consider what other vendors are selling. You want to consider if there's any rules on food or baked goods. So in our market, if you want to sell any kind of food, you had to get a food inspection license. You had to go through all of these hoops and hurdles that you wouldn't have had to go through if you didn't sell something that was non-food related. So that is just something to note, because a lot of people do like to bring baked goods or, something that they can make at home easily that is edible. I will say that baked goods tend to do really well as a whole, because who doesn't like sweets? But there are typically more heavy regulations around that even in a market. So it's something to consider. Now, because there does seem to be a large group of people out there who are interested in soap, I'm going to use my soap example to dive a little bit more deeper to give you guys some details. So when I outsourced the making of my soap, I found a local soap maker. This was actually a soap maker who also sold under their own brand. So they basically made soap for me, what we call private label, meaning it is completely bare and unpackaged, and then they give it to me and then I sell it under my name. So that was a really good arrangement for me because I didn't have to make the soap. That soap maker had already had the warehouse, the setup and everything, and they were looking to bring in some extra income because they were not maximizing the space and their supplies to make as much soap as they could. So it was a win-win situation there. I would say that this is a really, really good route if you know a local soap maker, if you want to incorporate some of your floral elements into the soap. So for example, something like calendula. Calendula petals are very often used in soap making. You can actually mix it into the soap itself, and it's supposed to provide some relief, calm, soothing properties. But the bigger piece of it is that calendula petals actually hold up really well in soap. One thing that I learned and that you do want to avoid is something like rose petals or whatever dried petals it is that you are layering at the very top of the soap. It looks really nice, it looks pretty, but once you get into the shower, it kind of gets a little bit gunky and gooey, so you want to avoid that. So think about how you incorporate your floral elements is actually something you want to spend a little bit more time to do. I would say that other good examples are thinking about using seeds as exfoliants. So for example, poppy seeds are a really, really good way to incorporate. We had a bar called the Sunshine Bar where it was the citrus bar. It was scented with orange essential oils. It had poppy seeds in there, and we colored it with some turmeric, and so it made it this like orange yellow color. That was a really good seller. I have incorporated the calendula petals, as I said before. We call that Sunkissed. That was also a really good seller, and we scented that one with lavender essential oils. So some people actually think about, oh, like, can I grow enough flowers to squeeze the oils out of them to make essential oils? And I'm gonna go out right now and say it is very unlikely that you're gonna be successful in making any kind of quantity that is necessary to do that. I mean, you've got lavender farms out here in the US who specialize in making lavender, and they can't produce enough lavender to make essential oils, right? Typically, you're talking about like thousands of acres of production of these kind of flowers to make essential oils because you need so much to make a little bit. So all that to say, there's a lot of ways that you can incorporate these floral elements, but this outsourcing only works if you can find a local soap maker. So if you don't know of a local soap maker, you can just do some Googling and see what are some local brands around you that make soap, and give them a call and say, hey, are you looking to make extra soap, potentially private label? That is a really good way to figure out if you guys could partner together. All right, so let's talk about pricing in this type of arrangement. So I paid my local soap maker $3 per bar, which I will say is relatively generous because I was paying this $3 per bar for about, I would say, 3-4 years. So this is before inflation hit. Now, that being said, they never raised their prices on me last year, even when the cost of oils went up. But that being said, the $3 per bar allows them to pay their soap maker a good living wage. It made sense for us, right? One could argue that $3 is a little bit too much. And then I'll show you some examples where the $3 is going to feel like a bit of a steal. So at the end of the day, $3 for a bar, I would retail these bars for $10. So basically $9.99 online in my e-commerce shop, and I would do a bundle pick four for $32.99. In the market, I always offered a discount. It's also kind of clunky to charge $32 or $33. I like to do things in fives or tens because then it makes my life easier if people are paying in cash. So I would still retail a single bar for $10, but I would do four for $30. And oftentimes I would be able to upsell people to buy the four for 30. And so that is a bigger cart size, right? So even though I'm making less per bar, I'm bringing in more money as a whole. So I would say that the 4 for 30 was always a really good bestseller type of deal. I made a lot of money at the market through soap, through selling in multiples of 4 in that manner. The other thing that I want to talk about here is candles. So I did sell candles just to give you guys a rough estimate of how much I paid for candles. I paid $11 for a single candle. These candles were made out of soy wax. They were hand poured. The price of soy has skyrocketed so much that I felt $11 was fair. Again, allows their candle maker to make a very fair wage. When I talk about some other alternatives, you'll see that there's actually cheaper alternatives than the $11. And I retail these candles for $18 at the market, but then I sold these candles online for $22. And so at $18 at the market, I'm making a little bit, but I'm not making a lot. So there are days where when I sold a lot of candles, my profit wasn't too great. So of course, something else that you want to take into consideration is the products that you're carrying and really what is the margin that you're going to be able to make on these. Now, when I bought both the candles and the soaps from the soap maker, I am in charge of providing the packaging. So for the market, they actually packaged everything for me. So the labor was included in that $3 and $11, but I had to provide the packaging. So any additional fees or costs on top of that would be added on top of that $3 and $11 for me. Now let's get into this category of private label. Private label, believe it or not, is all around us. For a lot of the consumer goods we buy, they are actually private labeled. And what that means is that you've got a few companies out there making or specializing in making a certain product, and they just slap brands and packaging that's different on all of the same product and then marketing it to different types of customers. So I first learned of this when we were scaling our soap production. So we make our soap what we call this cold process way. That is the traditional way of making soap, the handmade route. But there's stuff out there that you'll see in the grocery store that does not look like it's handmade. It's more shelf stable. It lasts a lot longer. These are typically triple milled, or they're soaps that are just made by machines because they're pressed so tightly together in a way that you and I can never do it by hand. So when we were scoping out options for triple milled soap, I found out that there are basically 2 to 3 major soap manufacturers in the US, and they basically make soap for everyone. So one of these companies actually sent me like a little welcome kit. I got soap from Clinique, from what else? From Honest, like all of the big brand names. They were all together in this box, and it really blew my mind. But the point is that there's different tiers of private label, because there's also private label in the world of handmade, and that is another route that you can go to. So in this particular situation, you've got companies that you can just go to directly, or you've got platforms that connect these third-party companies that will either private label or sell you their own brand and connect them with a retailer such as yourself, who has either a market or a brick and mortar for a place to sell those goods. So let's start first with my first example or my first experience with private label. So before I found this local soap maker, I was actually ordering soap from a relatively large private label soap maker in the US. And I ultimately decided to go away from the soap maker because I didn't, how do you say it? I was doing like a diversity audit to see, how they try to employ or incorporate diversity into their practices and stuff. And I didn't really like their answer. So long story short, I wasn't really aligned with some of their employment values. And I decided to switch away to this local soap maker who cost more, but was definitely more aligned to my values. And I didn't have to ship the soap. But in any case, this is actually such a large private label soap maker that there are multiple brands that I've caught using this manufacturer. So they'll sell bars from the high end of $2.19. So you only have to pay, or you only have to buy 48 bars for that. Or you can go upwards of 288 bars at a given time, and that will cost you $1.89 a bar. So all in all, the costs are actually very reasonable. There's a lot of different kinds of scents that you can choose, and this allows you to really have a variety on your hands without needing to commit too much capital, right? So For me at that point, I was actually selling each of these bars for $8 and I was doing four for $26.99. So at the end of the day, I was making some kind of margin, but I'll be honest, in the online shop that I was running, soaps were not necessarily the best high margin product as a whole, but I was still able to make some money off of it. Now, I said I was charging about $8 each a bar. There was another company, which I'll put a photo over here, that was charging $15 a bar using the same exact soap. So this goes to tell you that at the end of the day, when we talk about pricing and people are trying to compete against the grocery store and everything, there's just so many different types of customers out there. It's how you brand it. It's how you market yourself. It's a story that you tell. And really, it could be the same exact product. We're slapping different labels, different branding on it, and it commands a completely different price. So that is one route that I went. But I think that for a lot of people here, a more reasonable route is something called like a fair marketplace. So fair marketplace is one out of many that exists out there. There's another one called Bulletin. And I think there might be two more out there, but fair is the one that I am familiar with. I actually sold my soap on Fair Marketplace to other retailers who wanted to carry my soap. And so because my soap was more sustainably oriented, the packaging was plantable. I also have shampoo bars, so those are plastic free. I was selling to a lot of refilleries, so places or brick and mortars that wanted to carry sustainable products. But in any case, Fair has another side for people who are at markets or at those brick and mortars who want to sell goods. And that's where I think it could be applicable to someone who is doing a farmer's market and looking to diversify their products. So when you go onto Fair, they will literally have an assortment of all kinds of products. We've only been talking about candles and soap, but you could be selling even dried flowers they have on there. They have ceramics. They have really anything. So the world is your oyster. You can search for whatever you want, but I did a quick search on soap and candles. And what I found was that for soap bars, you can find anywhere from $2.50 to $6 a bar for private label. So again, this is the soap maker making a generic soap that is unpackaged, unlabeled, and you slap your brand on it. But there are also many makers out there, probably more makers out there, who have their own brands and they are willing to sell to you at wholesale pricing. And then you sell that branded soap in your market or brick and mortar shop. And so there's typically what they called an MSRP, which is a recommended sticker price. So let's say you buy something for, we'll call it $4, then they would recommend you sell it for $8 or $9. And you typically don't want to deviate too much away from that MSRP because they set it for a reason. They want their pricing to be consistent no matter where their customers go. So those are two very, very viable alternatives. I actually did this for Christmas. I bought a bunch of candles and hand balm because my soap maker at that time was going through a transition. They were changing warehouses and they just didn't have the capacity to make winter candles for me. So I went online and I bought some candles, I bought some hand salves, and let me tell you, I completely sold out of them. So I obviously let my market manager know that, hey, I'm going to bring in some third-party candles because I don't have enough of my own. And for the holiday market, they were totally fine because they knew that people wanted some more holiday themed stuff. So I bought like a very holiday themed candle. You can see over here, Santa's face is actually plastered on here, and it did really, really well. So what I liked about it was obviously I got to experiment with a whole host of different scents that I would not have been able to with my soap maker because, when my soap maker is buying in essential oils, he's buying in large quantities to be able to give me the pricing that I'm looking for. So I'm really confined to maybe like 2 cents at most. This, I was able to get 4 cents. I was able to test out how hand balms would do, that kind of stuff. So it was a really good experiment for me. And I would say I sold the most of the candles and the hand balms at that market than anything else that I brought, including my soaps and some of the tulips that I had been able to force at that time. Now, one thing I do want to say is that if you are interested in signing up for FAIR, especially to buy, I would really appreciate if you reach out to me for a referral code. Fortunately, I cannot generate a generic code. I have to put your email in or your business name in order for me to get that credit. That'd be really awesome on my end if you are able to take some time and do that as a favor to me. So now let's talk about the pros and cons, and I've alluded a little bit to this. So the pros of outsourcing, doing private label or selling on behalf of another brand is that you don't need to make it, right? Flower farming takes a lot of time. I think the last thing, honestly, you really want to do is throw another new thing on top of that, learning how to do it well. It's really, really difficult. So unless if you've had experience making soap or making whatever product you want to sell, or it's something that you've made in the off season, I honestly would not encourage it, because I don't believe in breaking up too much of your time and effort into different kinds of priorities, because then you don't end up doing anything too well. The second thing is that you can start experimenting to see what sells best. I said that at my market, I was attracting two very different types of people, but I also knew that my candles, because they smelled so good, were actually attracting people from a scent perspective. They were coming in. Some of them thought it was the flowers. So I was able to get people to look at my booth a little bit more than just the flowers alone. And sometimes the flowers were the ones that captured people's interest in terms of the color and the vibrance. They came to my booth and they would end up buying soap and candles instead, right? So there's that complementary piece there, but you have no idea, maybe you sell something else that is going to be attention grabbing, and you're just able to figure out, hey, like this product plus flowers, not a combination that I would have thought would have worked, but really works well for me. So that's another pro. And then last but not least, I think that it's a really good way of experimenting without a ton of capital. So someone asked me, how hard is it to make soap? And I'm like, it's not that hard to make soap. Anyone can make soap. You have to have the soap molds, you have to have hopefully like a silicone liner, you have to buy the oils, you have to buy sodium hydroxide, water, and then there's the effort of making it. It's really exciting for the first few batches, and then honestly, it's gonna get old over time. So I think that this could also be a way for you to test, like, hey, like maybe I want to make soap in the future. I don't know how it's going to sell. So let me do some private labeling first, experiment, test it out, see if it's going to sell well. And if it does, then I'll invest in all the upfront equipment to do it. And I would say this is even more relevant for candles, because for candles, hypothetically, you want to buy like one of those pots that can melt the oils so that you can pour really easily. There's a lot more, I feel, upfront infrastructure invested needed for candles than for soap making. Last but not least, the cons. So I think the cons are a little bit more constrained to your market. One thing I do want you to think about is, a lot of people think that if you sign up for a farmer's market, you'll get accepted. And that is honestly far from the truth. There's usually a lot more people who want to sell the same thing than what the farmer's market can accommodate in terms of the number of vendors. So a good farmer's market is going to have a market manager that is very diligent in looking at, hey, this vendor wants to sell XYZ, another vendor wants to sell something else. We want to make sure we're not having too many vendors selling the same exact thing, because it doesn't benefit anyone there. So that being said, you want to make sure that you are not potentially bringing in something that is competing with something else that another vendor is selling. Now, when you go through the private label route, one of the things that you benefit from is the economies of scale from that person who you're buying from. They're likely having some sort of, scale. They have the overhead that you don't have to outlay, right? So it's ultimately going to be sometimes cheaper for you to go through that route than for that local candle maker or soap maker to make their own soap and then sit at that farmer's market. So it almost becomes very easy to undercut your neighbor vendor in price. And that is something for you to really think about and be very mindful of. Outside of that, the only other con is sometimes you are at the mercy of the of the supplier. There are times where they've run out of certain scents and SKUs and you have to wait a while, but those are relatively, I would say, better trade-offs than, some of the other things that you have to give up if you were to do everything from scratch and on your own. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Drop me in the comments below some of the things that you sell at your farmer's market, things that have worked for you, and we'll see you next time.